Hello everyone, welcome back to TH Academy. Hope you guys are doing great. So in this video, we are going to start a very important topic that is basically related to macroeconomics, which is gross domestic product, GDP. So in this video, we're going to understand the whole topic like its meaning, types, real versus nominal GDP, components of GDP, formula, measurement of GDP. Also, we are going to understand how we can calculate GDP by using three different methods like expenditure method, income method, and output product method. And in the end, we are going to understand the GDP alternatives like GNP and HDI. So let's start with the basics. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It's one of the most important measures used to understand how strong or weak a country's economy is. In simple words, GDP tells us the total value of everything a country produces, like all goods and all services within its borders over a certain period of time, usually 1 year. So there are different types of GDP like nominal GDP and real GDP. We will also learn what makes up GDP, the components of GDP such as consumption, investment, government spending, and exports. Economists use three main ways to calculate GDP. First, that is expenditure method by adding up all spending. Second one is income method by adding up all income or by adding up all goods and services produced, that is basically output or product method. And finally, we will also look at some other indicators like GNP and HDI, which help us understand a country's progress beyond just money. So now, start with the first slide. That is okay. Now, understanding GDP, gross domestic product. Now, what exactly does GDP show us? GDP represents the total value of everything produced in a country. That includes cars, clothes, phones, education, healthcare, like everything made or produced, everything made or provided within that nation's border. So we use GDP to see whether the economy is growing or shrinking. If GDP increases, it usually means people are working or spending and producing more, which is a good sign. But if GDP decreases, it can mean businesses are slowing down or people are spending less. So GDP is just like a report card for a country's economy. It tells us how healthy or unhealthy the economy is. Now, basically, there are two main types of GDP that economists talk about, like nominal and real GDP. So, nominal GDP measures the value of goods and services at current prices. This means it includes inflation. For example, if prices go up, nominal GDP will rise, even if the amount of goods and services has not changed. Real GDP, on the other hand, removes the effect of inflation. It uses price from a specific base year. This gives us a more accurate idea of how much production has actually increased, not just prices. So, in short, nominal GDP shows growth with price changes, whereas real GDP shows the true growth in production. Now, GDP in macroeconomics. GDP is not just a number, it's one of the most powerful tools in macroeconomics. Governments use GDP to make decisions about spending, taxes, and policies. For example, if GDP growth is slowing, they may increase spending to boost the economy. Economists also use GDP to compare one country with another, just to see which economy is stronger or growing faster. And for businesses, GDP helps them plan. If GDP rising, companies might invest more or expand. If it's falling, they might hold back. So GDP helps everyone, governments, businesses, and economists understand the direction in which the economy is moving. Now, components of GDP. GDP is made up of four main parts of the four main important parts that together show how money moves through the economy. First one is consumption. This is the spending done by households. It includes things like buying foods, clothes, or paying for services like healthcare or education. Next one is investment. This means spending by businesses on machines, tools, buildings, or any other item that helps produce goods in the future. Next, government spending. This covers the money the government spends on the public services like roads, hospitals, defense, and schools. And the last one is net exports. Exports is basically the value of what a country sells to other countries, like exports minus imports. Exports minus what it buys from them, that is imports. So it's basically the formula of net exports is X minus M, where X means exports and M means imports. So let's understand the types of GDP. So now let's talk about one of the most important parts of this topic, the different types of GDP. Each type tells us something slightly different about how an economy is performing. So let's go through them one by one carefully and clearly. First one is GDP, nominal GDP. First we have nominal GDP. Nominal GDP measures the total value of all finished goods and services produced in a country using current market prices. That means it includes the effect of inflation. In simple words, it's the actual amount of money spent on earned in a given year based on the prices that exist right now. Here's the formula of nominal GDP, where nominal GDP equals to summation PT into QT, where PT is basically the price of goods and services in the current year, and QT is the quantity of goods and services produced in the current year. So we multiply the price of each product by the number of units produced and then add up everything. Real GDP. Now let's move to the next type, that is real GDP. Real GDP removes the effect of inflation to show the actual increase in production. It uses prices from a base year so economists can compare different years fairly. Here is the formula of real GDP, that is nominal GDP divided by GDP deflator multiplied by 100. GDP deflator is basically a measure that adjusts for price changes or inflation. So, real GDP tells us how much output truly increased, not just how much prices went up. Next is potential GDP. Potential GDP shows the maximum output a country can produce when all its resources like labor, capital, and technology are fully and efficiently used without causing inflation. It doesn't mean that country always produces that much. It's the ideal level of output, kind of like the engine's maximum speed before overheating. So there isn't one fixed formula, but economists estimate it usually using the model like this. Potential GDP equals to labor force multiplied by productivity per worker. So if a country has more workers or if each worker becomes more productive through better skills or technology, its potential GDP increases. So if the actual GDP is lower than potential GDP, it means resources are underused. Maybe people are unemployed or factories are not working at full capacity. Whereas if the actual GDP is higher than potential GDP, the economy is overheating and inflation might rise. Next, now let's talk about GDP per capita, a very important measure for comparing living standards. So GDP per capita tells us the average income or output per person in a country. It helps us understand how rich or poor a country's citizens are on average. Here is the formula of GDP per capita, that is GDP divided by total population. It's often used to compare living standard between countries. For example, a small country with a high GDP per capita may have better standard of living than a large country with a big GDP but a huge population. Next one is GDP growth rate. Finally, we have the GDP growth rate, which shows how fast an economy is growing or shrinking over time. It tells us the percentage change in GDP from one year to the next. Here is the formula for GDP growth rate, that is current GDP minus previous GDP divided by previous GDP multiplied by 100. For example, if GDP last year was $900 billion and this year it's $950 billion, then GDP growth rate would be 5.5%. If we put these values in the formula, we get 5.5% GDP growth rate. So that means the economy grew by 5.5% this year, which is a healthy sign for progress. So if the number is negative, it means the economy has shrunk, which could indicate a recession. Now we have GDP at purchasing power parity. Sometimes comparing GDP across countries is not fair because prices differ from one country to another. So that's why where purchasing power parity comes in. Purchasing power parity adjusts for differences in cost of living and prices between countries. It shows how much people can actually buy with their money. For an example, $1 might buy more food or clothes in USA than in China. So purchasing power parity helps make that comparison fair and realistic. It's one of the best ways to compare living standards around the world. Now let's move to the next slide, that is measuring GDP calculation approaches. So there are three main ways economists calculate GDP. The expenditure approach means adds up all the spending of final goods and services. Second, the income approach adds up all the income earned by people and companies. Third, the output or product approach adds up all the value of everything produced in the economy. Even though these methods are different, when done correctly, they all give the same GDP results. Now let's understand each one a bit more simply. Income method. We add up everyone's income, like salaries, profits, rent, and interest. It shows how much money people and companies earn. Next one is expenditure method. We add up how much money people, businesses, and the government spend on goods and services. Third, the output or product approach. We measure the total value of everything produced in factories, farms, and service sectors. So all three methods help us understand how the economy works from different point of views. Now, here is a simple example of how GDP is calculated using the expenditure method. Imagine a country where people spend $500 billion on goods and services. Business investment is $200 billion. The government spent $150 billion. Exports are $100 billion and imports are $50 billion. So here's the formula of expenditure method as we just learned before. This slide adds up all the spending of final goods and services. GDP equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay, this X minus M represents the net exports. Net exports formula. Here's the net exports formula, that is X minus M. Export minus of import. So this formula is used to calculate GDP using expenditure method. Here is the condition. Suppose in a year, consumption, investment, and all the values are given. So what we have to do, we need to find the value of GDP using this method. By using this formula, GDP equals to C plus I plus G plus net exports, that is X minus N. So when you put these values in the formula, we get $900 billion. So that's how economists calculate GDP in real life using spending data. I hope you guys understand this example. Now let's move to the importance of GDP in decision making. GDP is extremely important for decision making. Governments use it to plan budgets, make economic policies, and decide where to invest money. If GDP is falling, they might lower taxes or increase public spending to boost growth. For comparisons, economists look at GDP to see how one country performs against another, or to compare how the same country has performed over time. So it's basically the foundation for smart economic decisions. Next, importance of GDP for businesses and trends. So businesses also depend heavily on GDP data. Where GDP is growing, companies feel confident to invest more, like hire workers and expand production. But if GDP slows down, they become cautious, like reducing investment or cutting costs. So economists and investors also use GDP trend to predict what will happen in the markets, like whether growth will continue or a slowdown might come. So GDP does not just guide governments; it basically helps the shape the business world. Now, limitations of GDP. While GDP is a useful measure, it's not just perfect. So it ignores unpaid work like housework or volunteer service, even though these things add value. It doesn't show the damage to the environment caused by production. It also does not tell us how is distributed. One person could be very rich while others are poor, and GDP might still look good. And finally, GDP does not measure happiness or well being. A country can have high GDP but low life satisfaction. So that's why GDP should be used carefully. It tells us about economic output, not overall human happiness. Now let's move to the GDP alternatives, that is GNP and HDI. To get a more complete picture, economists used other indicators too. GNP, or Gross National Product, measures all the goods and services produced by a country's citizens, even if they live or work abroad. It focuses on income earned by a nation's people. HDI, or the Human Development Index, looks beyond money. Like it combines life expectancy, education, income to show how well people are actually living. So while GDP shows how much a country produces, HDI shows how well its people are doing. So that's how it works. Basically, this is the recap of GDP Essential. GDP is a vital economic measure encompassing its definition, components, significance, and limitations as well. So we already understand the whole topic in a very detailed way. So I hope this is basically the end of our lesson on GDP, Gross Domestic Product. I hope you find this session easy to understand and helpful in clearing your concepts about how economies actually work. If you enjoyed learning with me, then don't forget to like this video to show your support. Share it with your friends and classmates who are also studying economics. Subscribe to my channel, TH Academy, and click the bell icon so you never miss any of our upcoming lessons. And don't forget to check out our other playlist on economics, microeconomics, and macroeconomics, statistics, mathematics, business studies, and public finance as well. So you can suggest any topic you want me to cover next in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Keep learning, stay motivated, and see you in the next session only on TH Academy. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.